All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode 0 of the Rojas Report. So I'm really excited to share with you everything that we've got going on. First of all, if you're in the chat, be sure to, join in, ask questions, share any information that you want. Also, it would be helpful if you let me know if there's any technical issues that happen so I can make sure and get those resolved. But I am excited to share with you this new venture. So, of course, Open Minds UFO Radio hasn't been going on for a little while here. And I've got something new going on now that's going to be a little more than just UFOs, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And the way we're going to do this is way more interactive. So we're going to have a chance for you all to be just like this, doing these live streams a couple times at least every week, where you can join in and interact and ask questions. And so we can get more of a back and forth. I'll even have a chance at times to bring some of you on to ask your question, via video and say hi. In fact, we can even try that today. Maybe I'll ask if any of you have your cameras on and I can invite you in. But so it's going to be a lot of fun that way. In fact, it's so much of a community. You all helped me come up with the name. So actually, it's funny, because the Rojas Report was something I was really hard considering. And I told people, I'm thinking of Alejandro Live, because that was the other one. And it was kind of between those two. And somebody said, well, I like the Rojas Report, out of the blue. And a lot of people, most people liked that comment or commented on that. So overwhelmingly, people liked that name. So I stuck with that name. So that's what we got. What I like about this name, too, some of you who have followed my work, you know that I cover sci-fi, entertainment type of stuff. And, I sometimes get to interview and interact with actors and actresses and showrunners and directors and all of that sort of thing. I also work in science and especially space. So I get to interview astronauts and, scientists and all of this sort of thing. But since Open Minds was just UFOs, I didn't really get to incorporate some of that stuff. So that's why I'm calling this the Rojas Report. And to be honest, if I get, next time I talk to an astronaut, I'll say, hey, come on my live stream or my podcast. And they can be shy. They definitely very shy when it comes to UFOs. So for instance, I had a story where I asked Scott Kelly, the astronaut who had spent a lot of time in space, what he thought about UFOs. I had to kind of fit that into, the last of my questions when I got to talk to him. And he probably wouldn't have come on a UFO show, but he'll come on something called the Rojas Report, where I get to do other space stuff. So, and that's really kind of the point of what I'm trying to do here. So my whole career in UFOs was as a journalist. I was a journalism student, and I recognized then, as someone who is also interested in space and science. In fact, my first major was engineering. I wanted to be a rocket scientist. But I recognized then there was a lot of really credible information. And it wasn't getting the attention that it should have in the mainstream. In the 90s, there were very few credible outlets. The mainstream really joked about the topic in the 90s and even the early 2000s. Over time, things got a little more serious, and I feel like, my work with the Mutual UFO Network, for instance, we were able to gain a lot of inroads. I also think that with Open Minds, we were able to also treat this topic very credibly and get a lot of inroads there. And now with To the Stars, and especially with Luis Elizondo coming out, sharing some of these cases that are very credible, the Navy, the Air Force, the DoD, all talking about this topic and making this topic more mainstream. We've even got more mainstream journalists, friends like Brian Bender or Tyler Rogaway, who are writing about this topic on a fairly regular basis. And so we've got this really cool melding of our interest in this topic and mainstream organizations, science, journalism, all of this going on. And I kind of feel that that's the niche that we can serve here with the UFO or the Rojas Report. And us as a community, you all who, kind of interact with me and with what we're doing, and then the UFO Twitter kind of movement, and all of my buddies there who are also kind of working in this space, that we can all work together to make this, not lose this momentum, keep integrating, these topics into the mainstream so we can bring more people into the fold, and then also do some really interesting stuff. So for example, one of the organizations I work with closely is the Scientific Coalition for UAP Research, and it's science-based. And we have been doing some live streams with that group too. In fact, we're going to have one next week with Kevin Knuth, who's a physicist at SUNY Albany. And he's going to be talking about this modeling that he's done where, he can take physics and computer programming and make these computers kind of figure out, for instance, like if there are other civilizations out there, what levels might they be in their technology, and given their level of technology, how far might they be able to explore and what they might be exploring. It's educated speculation on what might be going on there with intelligent extraterrestrial civilizations. So, super fascinating. We had a guy talk about dark matter and UFOs a couple of weeks ago with the SCU. So that sort of thing. Yeah, Kevin Knuth, someone said in the chat. Exactly. Someone said just an idea as a one-off, maybe get a panel together with people like Grant Cameron, George Knapp, Richard Dolan, and John Alexander. Great idea. We'll try to do some of that stuff going forward. In fact, that brings me to kind of the other thing that I've been doing with Den of Geek. I've been really examining these latest Navy headlines. Den of Geek is more of a mainstream sci-fi entertainment kind of channel. But when the Navy news hit just recently, this latest news, they asked me to do some live streams, and I've brought on Alexander and some of these others to kind of examine what was going on with that story. And that's another example of kind of movement into the mainstream that this topic is taking. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm really excited about this. Now, I guess I'll get this out of the way first. There's going to be premium services. So if you heard me doing Open Minds Radio, UFO Radio, I kept talking about in the last year, and I don't like asking for money or donations or that sort of thing. If I ask you to give money for something, I want you to get something in return. Although I'm definitely very democratic, I'm also I believe in capitalism as well. I'm a patriot, but so I want you to get something in return. But as I had said on the Open Mind UFO Radio, one of the reasons I wasn't able to keep it going is I just couldn't afford it, the time or the expense. And so I am going to be charging for things that cost me money, but I'm going to have plenty of free content. And I mean, it's really important for me to get information out. So in fact, I'm going to share my screen here just so we can kind of take a look at some of what this is going to be like and what I mean. So let's take a look here. So I'm going to have a podcast. That's what this is. It's hosted on Podbean. Right now, it doesn't have anything there because I haven't done a podcast yet. But this is my podcast. What I'm going to do with these live streams is I'm going to extract the audio, and then I'm going to post those as my podcast. And so it'll be dynamic that way. So you can see here the Podbean site. Now, I will have premium content. So here's what I want to do. I want to do shows twice a week. One show is going to be a longer show, an hour to an hour and a half. That show is going to consist of either me addressing a topic or an interview or a panel or lectures. I've put together so many lectures. One of the things I like to do when I do a talk is I like to update my lectures or create a brand new one. I always tell people when they ask me to come speak at their event, do you have a topic you want me to write on? Because I love researching topics and making new lectures. So I've got a lot of lectures in the hopper, and a lot of them people haven't seen. Things like astronomers and UFOs, religion and UFOs, Steven Spielberg and UFOs. I've got some space lectures like how are we going to live in space? How do we, if we have a habitat in space, How are we going to defend ourselves against radiation? I have a pretty exhaustive talk on To the Stars and this new, Pentagon revelation and the details behind all the people involved. So once a month, I'm going to be presenting a lecture. So you'll be able to see the slides if you join the video side. But if you hear the audio, I'm also going to explain everything there. So I'm going to be doing that. And then also every Friday, just like today, I'm going to cover UFO news or whatever space and interesting news we have in the headlines. I'll have guests join me on that so we can have fun and be goofy, but also serious about some of these issues that are going on or some of these stories in the headlines, because there's exciting stuff going on all the time. So that'll be a shorter show that I'm going to have on Friday. Now, the Friday shows, the audios for the Friday shows, it's going to be free. It'll be posted up here. You can join it as a regular podcast. However, for the longer shows, that is going to be a premium subscription, but it's $1.50 a month. Totally affordable, I think. $1.50 a month, for goodness sakes. And the extra 50 cents is just to cover like the back end cost of the charging services and stuff like that. It's all very complicated. So here's Podbean. This is going to be where the audio exists. This will be where the podcast is. Also, there's another way to subscribe to all of this, and that is through Patreon. At Patreon, which you can see here, which is just, I've got the links. You can see the links here on the left-hand side, actually, on Podbean. But you can also see the links. I'll post the links on these, but I'll show you another place to get the links in just a minute. But here's my Patreon. Please do come and subscribe and be a follower on Patreon. Even if you don't, donate any money at all, I post everything that I do here. So it's a great place for you to keep up on what I'm doing besides social media. But here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to post every audio. Every live stream I do, I'm going to turn into an audio. I'm going to post it here. You can see if you're a member at 100 or 150 pennies, $1.50 a month, you'll be one of my pod people. So pod people, because you're podcasters. And you'll get access to all of my audio content, as well as my articles, my live streams that I do for free, which, I do in conjunction with like Den of Geek or SCU or many other groups. You'll get all of that, a ton of stuff. On top of that, if you join at only $5 a month, then you get absolutely everything. That's intergalactic, planetary. You'll get access to the video live streams like this one. So you'll be able to join every single live stream, and you can do it from Patreon. You don't got to go to YouTube or anywhere else. It's embedded into Patreon. I've got it all embedded in there. But you'll be able to come on to Patreon, and you'll be able to, or YouTube or wherever else I have it, and you'll be able to come in and chat, and talk and just like you're doing right now. Full access to absolutely everything. I'll also be doing giveaways. Like I've got a ton of t-shirts over here that I've collected over the years that I get sent to me or for promotional stuff. I'll start to give those away. In fact, why don't I do that right now? So if you want a free t-shirt, put your t-shirt size and what kind of, like if you prefer UFO, well, they're all UFO or alien. But yeah, say, hey, I want a t-shirt, and I'll pick randomly one or two people and I'll send you a t-shirt. But at the $5 level, you have access to everything. So that's really the best thing to do. Where do you get all the links and everything? Really the best, where I post everything, is at my website here. I've changed it up a little. AlejandroTRojas.com is the website. But I've got everything here. So you can see, subscribe to all of my content at Patreon. I've got all of my articles. Here you'll be able to go see more about just the Rojas report or just the podcast. Get to all of my other articles. Also, you can get here to see my Den of Geek articles, my Huffington Post articles, read more about me, see my media appearances, because I've got actually dozens of media appearances or references in mainstream media. So I have an ongoing list there. Contact me. And resources. This is a new one here where I've got like all the APRO bulletins, or at least over 250 nearly 250 APRO bulletins, and that number's growing. So APRO, if you don't know who they are, we're the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, created in 1952, a very important organization, and you can read about that here. The other thing I'm going to get up here, and we'll have a show on it, is the Rockefeller Document. In fact, we'll do a show on APRO too. But I'll get the Rockefeller Document, because one of the most influential documents, actually, especially with the Clintons, was the Rockefeller Document. Lawrence Rockefeller, who's one of the Rockefeller heirs, was interested in UFOs. He's passed away. He was very old. He passed away like 10 years ago, something like that. Well, about 20 years ago, he put together a document that was essentially the best cases. Well, now it's been like 30 years. And this document, he felt, was to show his friends. He only made 1,000 copies, but his friends that are all very influential, to show them, that this is a very credible field and there's a lot of credible information. On Open Minds, we have a copy of that document that is pretty rare. I've got a physical copy, but it's one of those first 1,000 copies. We photocopied that and have that available at Open Minds, but I'll also make that available here. So that's some of the stuff that I'll have growing here, just different documents and stuff like that are important. But also, if you're here on YouTube, you're going to be able to join as a member. And at least, of course, YouTube is video based. So the first level, you'll be able to watch the videos. I'll put an archive of the videos. The second level, you'll be able to join live and then join the live streams. And there's a third level where I'll just kind of add some more stuff. I might get rid of that third level, to be honest, because I think 2 levels is enough. But if you don't want to join through Patreon and you'd rather join through YouTube, you can do that as well. So that's what's going on here. So a little bit more information as to why in the background is what's going on with Open Minds, people are asking. So let me give you an idea. So Open Minds, contrary to popular belief, I have never owned. I've just been kind of, the face of Open Minds, one of them. Some of my good friends, like, Jason McClellan, and Maureen Ellsbury, and Antonio Huneeus. And I forgot to say, the reason we have that Rockefeller document is because of Antonio Huneeus. He actually worked on that team and was the main author. It doesn't mean he was the main one collecting information. There was a lot of people doing that, but he was the guy putting it together and then printing it in this one document. So Antonio Huneeus worked with us at Open Minds, and luckily he was the one who got me my physical copy of that document. I'll show it to you. I don't have it here. But I'll show it to you when I do have it. I actually am working in Arizona and California right now. So it's at my house in California. This is the UFO Congress headquarters I'm in right now in Arizona that my girlfriend runs. But yeah, let me give you some history. So Open Minds, also, Tom Ruffin also worked with Open Minds. Mike, I can't believe Michael Klein, all awesome, very talented people. And because we had such awesome, talented people, we were able to get some great stuff out at Open Minds TV. However, if you go to Open Minds TV right now, the websites might not be working. So let me give you some background and history on Open Minds. Essentially, it was started by a guy named John Rayo. And he is a guy who made a lot of money in the medical industry. And he decided he was really into UFOs. He essentially went to a conference in Las Vegas. It was the Crash Conference that used to be held by Ryan Wood. And he saw some talks, including the talk by Colonel John Alexander. He thought, whoa, this topic's awesome. It's real. It got him really into the topic. He then went back to the office and started saying, we need to look into this. And everybody's like rolling their eyes. What are you talking about? Well, one of his employees was Jason McClellan. And Jason was really into it. He's like, yeah, let's do this, John. So Jason, along with John, kind of got Open Minds going. And John eventually rolled it out into its own entity and decided he wanted to spend his own money in searching for answers in this topic. At that point, he began hiring people. He worked with the researcher Paula Harris to find different people to hire, and she recommended me along with others. And so John went out interviewing people. The other thing that he wanted to do was buy a UFO conference and run a UFO conference. At that time, the International UFO Congress was kind of in a transitionary period. So John decided and started negotiating to buy that. Well, at that time, besides working with MUFON, writing articles, doing a podcast, I was also helping the city of Roswell put on their annual event, and I was getting the speakers organized and getting them out there. I also was helping with the MUFON Symposium, and I was helping with the Congress. I actually was a volunteer for a couple of years with the Congress, and I loved the Browns who had ran it before us. So John came to Roswell one year. We had talked on the phone, but he wanted to see me in action and ask the other UFO researchers and presenters what they thought of me. Fortunately, they all felt positive of me and my work, so he hired me to help run Open Minds and the Congress. That's when he bought the Congress, and this is all about 2009, and that's when we got rolling. He also, Jason, he had hired Antonio by that time. He had a guy who worked at Entertainment Tonight, Tom Ruffin, a very talented videographer, to work on doing some videos on our YouTube like this. And we got rolling. So we started getting everything going. We started working on the conference and taking that over. We worked on creating a website. Jason and I pretty much headed up creating the website as a news kind of magazine like it is now. We got our social media, we got everything rolling at that point, and the magazine, because we had a physical magazine for a while. So the thing that John wanted to do, though, was kind of create this entity to get information out, but he didn't care about making money. And we kept saying that, maybe we should think about how to make sure that this company keeps going and bringing an income to make sure everything can be covered. And he was like, no, I care more about the information, which is very admirable. And so he was spending his own money to keep this going, but the bills definitely added up. And so over time, it just wasn't sustainable, Over time, his family, friends were like, hey, you're spending so much money on this, you can't do this anymore. And this is over the span of like a decade. And so finally, he started cutting expenses, the staff started getting smaller. I should say also that early on, Jason had worked with Maureen Ellsbury before in marketing and thought she was great. And so got Maureen hired on. And she was also, of course, a major player along with us at Open Minds. But so the staff just got smaller and smaller. We couldn't really get enough subscribers to the magazine, so we didn't do the magazine anymore. And essentially, Open Minds closed down about a year and a half or 2 years ago, and I was the last remaining employee. So essentially, I kind of inherited the task of keeping Open Minds alive to some degree. So without a staff, we kind of, we did have some ad money coming in from the website, some from YouTube, not like a lot. But so I just kept those things alive. I kept alive the social media. I kept posting on the website. And of course, I kept doing Open Mind UFO radio. But without, fortunately, all of us were getting a full-time income like any other job with Open Minds. But when it closed down, that all ended. So I had to seek other work. And, those of you who listen to Open Mind UFO radio, I'm an open book. I shared all of this with you pretty much as that time went along. But I tried to keep Open Mind UFO radio and all this stuff going on for a year and a half, but it was just really hard to do that. And then also do real estate, write for doing freelance journalism, help my girlfriend Karen run the UFO Congress, who's just right here waving at me and stuff because she's excited that I'm mentioning her. But of course, when Open Minds did, pretty much closed down, John sold off the Congress and my girlfriend decided to pick it up and run it. And she's been doing that. I call her my girlfriend, but we're practically, she's more like a partner. She's my soulmate. But so that's kind of how this is all evolved. And eventually it just kind of all came to a head. and I just wasn't able to do it all, and I had to reconfigure everything. So that's how everything ended. I've been able to keep the social media and everything alive. However, the website, you guys might have noticed, kind of has been deteriorating. Really, that medical company that John owns is the one that maintained and hosted the website. But their focus, of course, is their medical company. And the IT company runs their medical website. And so without anybody at Open Minds there, Open Minds kind of gets on the side, and it's hard to get people to update like the back end, the databases, the PHP, all of that sort of stuff that you have to update to keep a website running. And so things kind of are breaking here and there. I do what I can from my end, but the website hopefully will keep going, but I can't say for sure how that's all going to shake out. I actually did just talk to John literally within the hour, and he's definitely committed to doing what he can, but he's retired. He's still the owner, but he's at home retired. So it's even kind of tough for him to get in there and motivate the guys to, add this to their task list of the stuff they're already doing for their medical company. So that's the kind of the tenuous place that that is all at. That's one reason why I've got my all100trojas.com that I'm running stuff, because I have full access to that. I've just beefed it up as far as the server that it's on, and it's running fast and smooth and clean. But it's also why I need to bring in a little more income to keep all of this stuff going. And really, I was at a point when I stopped doing Open Minds UFO Radio where I was like, I don't know if I can keep this going in this field at all. And fortunately, I got so much feedback from friends like you all, friends, coworkers, and things like that I've been able to keep everything going. So, or I've been able to kind of be encouraged. Sorry, I got another message from John about the website here. Distracted me for a second. But anyway, all that encouragement, made me look for something else, encouragement from my friends at Den of Geek. And so this is what I've come up with, is this configuration here. If you can donate on the Patreon or subscribe on the YouTube at that $5 level, that's awesome. It's going to be very helpful. If you cannot, and you can do the $1.50 level on the Patreon or the YouTube, that's helpful. If you can't do that and you just want the access to the free information, that is cool too, because my goal is to get information out. And I hope you guys understand that it's not about, making money. It never has been about, generating huge amounts of money for me. It's been more about getting information out. That's my passion. That's why I'm in the journalism field. That's why I like to write. It's to share this fun and exciting information. And I'm extremely excited that we're going to be able to keep on doing this in the future. So there you go. That's the story. That brings you all up to date. So before I leave, though, before we end this, because how long has it been? Not that long, right? Oh, I don't have anything that tells me. But I want to talk about some news. So that's what we're here for, right? UFO news. First of all, some of the news in this story, or some of the headlines. Trump talking UFOs. If you didn't see this, you can see this in my social media, that the president actually was asked by his son about aliens. I want to hear about aliens. And he said something like, well, I've heard of some stuff about Roswell, and I may share something in the future. Some people are getting really, really excited about that, and me not so much. Now, of course, I never get that excited right off the bat on this stuff. Is it that I'm a little cynical? Yeah, as a journalist, we often are cynical because our first kind of knee jerk is to question the source. Even though people accused me of being, too biased when it came to Luis Elizondo to the stars, it's because they were credible. I think that's been borne out. They were that was honest, credible information. I was skeptical at first, and I'm still skeptical of some things, and I'll share that with you when that comes up. But there was it all borne out very well. that they were a credible source. Trump and UFOs. Here's my take on that. During the Hillary campaign, it was very curious that her campaign manager, John Podesta, kept pushing the UFO topic. Now, we did find through the WikiLeaks, because some of his emails got leaked, that he was working with Tom DeLonge, and they were talking about UFOs and trying to arrange some very high-level meetings about UFOs. However, I don't think that's what John Podesta was motivated by when he was trying to get his candidate to talk UFOs. When it comes to campaigns, it's very calculated. Your number one job is to get your candidate, to win. And I think their calculation there was they thought, since people knew, at least the people in the know when it came to UFO, people knew the Clintons had this Rockefeller background. They also had known that Bill Clinton and John Podesta were into UFOs. So I think John Podesta was trying to appeal to the UFO/conspiracy crowd, which typically I think people were Trump voters. And I think that personally, they were trying to get their in to get those voters. And that was Podesta's main motivation, to get Hillary to go on Jimmy Kimmel and other places and say, yes, I'm going to release as much information about UFOs as I can. Now, I think she was honest when she said that. I just think she felt there wasn't much out there. How do we know this? Well, her husband has said that he tried to look into Roswell, Area 51, and he wasn't able to get much information. One of the most interesting things about that is he always kind of had this caveat that they could have just not told me everything. In fact, in Hong Kong, in a famous video, he said, I wouldn't be the first president that career bureaucrats have lied to. In fact, this is really exciting too. In those WikiLeaks, there was some conversation about this that we found. So there were some Hillary Clinton staffers when she was going to go on Jimmy Kimmel, who said, Jimmy Kimmel wants to ask Hillary about UFOs. And the head staffer said, why? What is their deal? And they said, well, because Bill Clinton and John Podesta are really into UFOs. Here's some references. And they sent them a story from, I think it was the Washington Post, but they also sent them one of my stories from Open Minds TV, my story outlining how Podesta and Clinton were into UFOs. So I'm very proud that the Hillary Clinton campaign was getting educated by some of my work. But I think that's the case. And what I think here with Trump saying, yeah, maybe I'll release something, he's essentially taking a play from their playbook. I think essentially he's opening the door and saying, yeah, for you UFO people, you want to be on board with me, because if I get reelected, then I'll release some information about this, or at least be open to it. So far, there's been absolutely zero indication that the president has any interest in UFOs at all. Even with the Navy videos, he said, well, I don't think there's much to it, but I'll leave it to the Navy. So he really has shown no interest in the topic at all. I was even surprised in the Hillary campaign that he didn't jump on it when they were talking UFOs, Podesta and Hillary back then. So I think he's kind of just stealing that trick, as I called it on Twitter today, from the Hillary campaign to try to gain favor with the UFO lobby or the UFO crowd. But one good thing, silver lining to this all, is that now the Hillary campaign and the Trump campaign seem to think that, we're people who are interested in the UFO topic are a force to be dealt with, essentially. Whereas in the past, essentially, people like that were fringy or invisible. So that, I think, is a positive takeaway, is that now they're listening to that audience. And I think now this audience, our audience, has a lot more influence than we did in the past. So I think that's really good. Somebody said, personal political view and ufology, never a good mix. Well, my friend, I agree with you. I try to keep my politics out of talking about, with this stuff. But there's also facts, and there's also the truth. There's also sometimes there is a crossover. So for instance, what I just mentioned, I certainly did not, I feel, show a preference towards anyone. That's just the facts of the story, what I just shared. And I just, feel that through their actions and that, and it's not just Trump who hasn't had an interest in UFOs. Obama had no interest in UFOs. The Bushes had no interest in UFOs. I don't think they showed really any strong interest personally in my research, and I've researched this quite a bit. Of course, Jimmy Carter did have an interest. Gerald Ford had an interest. Clinton's had a strong interest, but not everybody does. So be it. That's just the way that it is. And then we'll save for other conversations, and I've had these conversations, but we'll do it again in the future as to what do the presidents know? What are they briefed on? That's an outstanding question, and a lot of people have different views on that. And luckily, as time goes on, we get more and more credible people to talk about this. So hopefully, we'll get more insight into that sort of information. I think right now, one of the greatest resources that we have as this community is Chris Melon. And Chris Melon, and I want to make sure that I get it all accurate just to make sure everybody understands his background. He's working with To the Stars, but he is a former United States Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence. He also worked in security and information operations, and he was a staff director of the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Now, this is really important, and that we have people like this involved, because he's the type of person that we need to get these sort of answers for. And fortunately, he's been very open lately. He's been sending information out on Twitter. He has been doing some interviews with Tom DeLonge on To the Stars. There are articles out there in New York Times and Huffington Post that are about him and his interests in this topic. But his job was literally to have oversight over a lot of Black projects. I think pretty much all of them. And that doesn't mean he knew details, but he knew, lists of what existed out there. And it was his job, like when a senator wanted to know, I want to know what's going on with this project, with that project. His job was to go seek out those Black projects and get whatever information he could to them, classified and not classified. So this is the pinnacle. This is the person who would know what the government knows, or at least what senators and presidents are told. Some of you may say, well, that doesn't mean that they would be told everything. And that may be. Certainly, I think you can make a strong argument that a lot of this stuff has been outsourced to private companies, corporations, and those corporations do not have to share any information as to what they're doing or where they get stuff. So it's a fair argument to say that maybe they're not privy to everything. But my big point here is with Chris Mellon, it's just, with all of this new arena we're in, we now have access to that level of information where we didn't before. And it's that sort of expertise that we need to ask those sort of questions to. So everybody's talking about the Wilson documents. I've talked a lot about that before. I recently did a show with Richard Dolan. I was very flattered to be invited with Richard Dolan to his one-day conference that he did a couple weeks ago. And in that, he and I debated that outside of, this stuff, we've debated it as well. I don't see it as a big deal personally, and I know that may shock some people, and here's why. It's a document, and we've had those for millennia. We've had leaked alleged documents that say this, that, and the other. And the problem with this document, as far as taking it to the mainstream, is that this document is allegedly a conversation between Dr. Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson, talking about some other UFO crash programs and things like that he didn't get access to, that he believes exists. However, Dr. Davis is not commenting as to whether that document is real. Admiral Wilson has said most recently with the journalist Billy Cox of the Sarasota Sarasota Herald Tribune, that that story is not true, that he wasn't even in Las Vegas where that conversation supposedly took place at that time, that he wasn't even in the Navy at that time. He says there's tons of problems with the story, and it's just nothing he would ever say. So he's not saying he doesn't even think that maybe those things don't exist, but that conversation didn't happen. Is he lying? Richard thinks so. He could be, but we don't have any evidence with all of the major players saying that it's not true or not going on the record. What can you do with that? To take that to the mainstream is the same sort of mistake we've made in the past, in that we're taking unsubstantiated information and propping it up as, the holy grail. And we just can't do that anymore. We have to be a little more sophisticated. We have to take substantiated information, such as a Navy UFO case that, we have expert witness testimony. That's a holy grail. That's something that we can really make some influence with. Does it mean the document's not real? No. Does it mean that if Dr. Davis had that, that's a real document from him, that he's a liar? I don't believe that at all. I think Dr. Davis is honest, credible. I think he's speaks his mind. And my only worry and concern lately is that, he is. People cite my interview with him with Open Minds just a few months ago a lot, because he revealed a lot of information that he believes these crashes and stuff have happened, and that he's gotten this information from insiders. Is he putting his career at jeopardy? Is he putting his clearances at jeopardy by saying that stuff? Maybe. So I do worry that that's the case. So I do hope he's careful there. A lot of people are saying that document's real. It may be. We don't know. But if it is real, what we need to do is work to verify it, work to substantiate it, and then also use it as clues to guide us in our research. We just can't really, in my opinion, I wouldn't do it, and I haven't. I haven't even written an article because we just can't run out there with it and say, look, I have another unsubstantiated, allegedly leaked document that claims all of this wild stuff. In my career in this, over a couple of decades, we've done that a ton of times. We have to get something substantiated and on the record first. And there are rumors that the New York Times or somebody else is going to write an article on this. I'm doubtful, and I'm a little worried if it's the New York Times. They might say we weren't able to substantiate it, and it's probably bunk, which wouldn't be helpful. Otherwise, unless them or some other organization was able to get a source to go on the record to confirm some of it, that would be very exciting. And maybe that'll happen. That'll certainly then change how things work. So that would be exciting. So I think that's some of the recent news. I'm going to go and look to see if you guys have any questions or comments here. If there's some other big news that I missed, let's see. Somebody asked about the Admiral papers, which I just talked about. Somebody said, this is somebody online, so don't jump on me about politics. And you know what? To be honest, I'm going to say what I want to say. This is the Rojas report. If you have a problem with it, I'm sorry. I do not mean to offend you. I respect you as a person, a human being, having your own perspective and opinions. A lot of my friends have very different opinions than I do, and I totally respect them, and I love them to death. So if for some reason I say something that offends you, it wasn't intended to offend you. If it's something that is a deal breaker with you, so be it. Happens. But this is what Donnie says. I think it's kind of funny. Or no, I mean, Dirk Bonesteel says. Bonesteel, he's been a long-time follower. Good seeing you. He says, Donnie Jr. just wants to hunt them, hoping they are endangered. And I got to say, it's kind of funny. But let's see. Hillary just wanted votes from the UFO community, says Stephen Padilla, another longtime follower. I agree with you 100%. So there you go. Criticism on both sides of the spectrum. Mark Salzman says, TTSA has very good people, and I get tired of the UFO community bashing, bragging on, especially folks like Putoff, Semavan, Melon, Elizondo, and Justice. I agree with you 100%. I think right out of the gate, and when I do my presentation, so this is one of the lectures that I'm going to do soon on my Wednesday live streams, which is the TTSA, how they came about, and who are the major players. And all of these people are people, for the most part, are people I'm going to be talking about. And they have decades and decades of working in the fringes of science, working on remote viewing, working on UFOs, working on, next generation propulsion. And these people have worked tirelessly to bring credibility to these topics with great success. If it wasn't for these people, we wouldn't be in this period of time where all of this is being taken much more seriously. In fact, look, I can show. So, Mark, I think you make a really good point. I agree with you 100%. And I don't think any of these guys, nor anybody, gets everything 100% right. But it was really sad when the beginning, to be honest, since I know Tom DeLonge, I got a little bit of early insight and early communication with some of these guys. Other people like Putoff, I've had very little conversation with, but followed his work for a long time. But so I very quickly was able to determine for myself, and I feel demonstrate it in my articles, that what they were sharing was credible. And I substantiated that with sources and information. And a lot of people jumped on me and felt like I was being swept up by all of this excitement, and I was wrong for that. But as time has borne out, this is the first time I've said this, but I am very well deserved. I took a lot of beating for early on, backing these guys, but and I deserve 100% to say, I told you so, because I did tell you so, and I wasn't a feeling, I backed it up. Okay, some questions come in here. Okay, somebody said, Dolan J. King, thank you for your question. Dolan was talking about various ET groups that day. Do you have a take on humanoids in ships not being of our world or culture? Yeah, Richard Dolan in his recent event was kind of going on the record that he believes, aliens are here, that there are several different cultures. He wouldn't go into necessarily saying what their motivations are, but that he shared what they could be. So he speculated on that. And I think it's very interesting. I think it's great to have someone like Richard, who's very intelligent, very educated on the entire field, to be able to champion that perspective. That perspective is not my perspective. I feel that we don't know it's alien yet, personally. I just feel that there are many other answers. And one of the reasons I feel this way is, well, partially because I'm a student of Alan J. Hynek and Jacques Vallée, but they're scientists, and I think they're right when they say, and if you follow space science, you'll see this, or science at all, you see this a lot, that often the mysteries, once they're solved, or our big discoveries in space, they are things we never could have imagined. Dark matter, for instance. Nobody knows what dark matter is, or even that it exists. There is a dark matter kind of meter that they have in Japan. I haven't fully read about this story, but I'll talk more about it next week, where they're getting more readings, more hits. So that's pretty interesting. But we don't know what dark matter is, and it's turning out dark matter is likely nothing like we think it might be, and it's probably going to be completely different. Everything turns out to be completely different than we thought. So we don't know. There's a lot of talk about multiple dimensions. What if these are people from other dimensions? Some people, like Jim Penniston, one of the major witnesses of the Rendlesham event in 1980, where a bunch of U.S. military guys, saw these craft in the Rendlesham Forest outside of a U.S. essential base out there in the U.K. Jim Penniston feels very, very strongly that what he saw was a craft from the future. So are these people from the future? One of the interviews that I did at Open Mind UFO Radio was with Michael Masters. He also spoke at the UFO Congress. He's going to be one of our presenters for the SCU, for the live streams at the SCU. Michael Masters makes a very educated and intelligent argument that he believes likely these are people from the future, not just the craft, but also the large-headed beings. And he shows how in his research is borne out, that's the sort of thing people, scientists are saying we're going to look like in the future. So I think there's still a number of possibilities. And I personally just don't want to say for sure, put all my money in one bag. Is it possible? Yes. Does the mainstream not take the possibility of extraterrestrial visitation seriously? Yes, I totally believe that. I completely believe if we're being visited, they can completely hide themselves from us. Why couldn't they? If they're extremely advanced, way more advanced than we are, they certainly could do that. Groups like SETI question, well, what would their motivations be? We can speculate what their motivations might be, but we wouldn't have a clue as to what their motivations might be. Who knows? It's silly to try to determine whether or not something is, or the veracity of whether or not there is visitation off of what our ideas of what motivations can be. I think that's silly. What we have to do is use real data to determine whether or not that's the case. And I think there's an abundance of anecdotal information, but we just haven't proven that yet. Could we prove it in the future? Maybe. I think that's possible, but we need to get more science involved. And I think that's something too the stars is trying to do themselves. Let's see. I read, Mark says, I read Puthoff and Russell Targ's mind research back in the early 80s, SRRV. Didn't know it was CIA back then. Yep, we'll talk about that. In fact, I'll do a remote viewing talk because that whole history is really interesting. If you're not familiar with remote viewing is essentially psychic phenomena. There's a psychic who could see places he wasn't at, allegedly. Ingo Swann and some scientists, such as Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, thought that was a credible ability. They tested him, felt that he really could do this, so they put a technical term to that ability, remote viewing. Ingo Swann said, I can teach people how to do this. And so they taught people how to do it, and they met with some success. They had a group together that would do this, and there was law enforcement and officials that came to get help from this group for decades. This organization existed for decades. People say, oh, it was all silly. If it was so silly, why did it exist for so long? And why did they get so much work? Now, the best remote viewer allegedly was right 20% of the time. And I talked to that remote viewer. I did an Open Mind UFO Radio interview with him, Jim McMonagle. And I said, well, 20%, that doesn't seem like much. And he said, well, if you've got a cold case, that's what people would come to us with cold cases. If you've got a cold case, the 20% chance of having that cold case solved is much better than zero. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Someone along those lines, let's see. I think I answered that question. Here's one. See, I like this. I'm not as afraid, not that I ever was. I never want to talk badly about anyone. And the people who were really on me and harassing me about To the Stars in those early days, I've never spoken badly about. There's only a couple people I speak badly about sometimes, the charlatans. And I won't go there now. But somebody asked me this. Yes, you did, Alejandro. He's saying, I was telling it right from the beginning. John Greenwald tried to poo-poo TTSA and me and George Knapp and others. He's singing a different tune now. He is. He's finally, his position that Lou Elizondo was kind of working by himself and lying is completely untenable. The evidence is, there's an abundance of evidence that Lou was telling the truth on those things that even the DOD said he wasn't telling the truth on. And John Greenwald has finally given into that. So I'm very happy about that. John Greenwald and I, before this, were really good friends. And we would talk often. And I would often write about his work because he does excellent work. And I still write and talk about his work because he does great work. But really, he was so upset about my position on all of this that we just weren't friendly anymore after that. And I feel like he defamed me quite a bit. He said I was a liar and all this other stuff and dishonest, blah, blah, blah. So we haven't really mended fences yet. Hopefully one day we will, but you're right. Told you so, John Greenwald. I'm being very petty, I realize that, but it's kind of fun. Told you so. I should get a t-shirt that has a To the Stars logo or something. I have a lot of To the Stars t-shirts or a couple, and that says I told you so. This is a good question. Somebody says Dolan. We're talking a lot about Richard Dolan. Well, which is fine because I was just on his show, and some of you must have watched it, which is great. Dolan seems to be behind Dr. David Jacobs and Barbara Lamb, good ET versus bad ET. Well, Dr. Jacobs is more of the bad ET. Barbara Lamb says there's bad and good. And you're right. I think that Richard doesn't believe it's all one or the other, but he does think that Dr. Jacobs, there's something substantial there. However, I've got to say, and I always got to speak my truth. But when it comes to Dr. Jacobs and Bud Hopkins, I've got a degree in psychology, and I've also got a certificate in hypnotherapy, and they don't. And I think that would have been important because much of the way they go about their work set a pre-bias in someone's mind. I have learned through hypnotherapy, which I think is an incredible therapeutic method. I could get you into a relaxed state and walk you through a fantasy. Now, the reason I would do this is for therapy, is to try to work on some issues you may have to resolve them. And every time you bring someone out of hypnosis, in my experience, and most hypnotherapists will tell you this, they'll say, oh my gosh, how did my brain come up with that? Who was that? Who was this? I don't know who that was. I don't know where that was. But it felt so real and my brain came up with it. The brain is very susceptible to false memory. I wrote a lot of papers about this when I got my degree on false memory because I was fascinated with it. Because of law enforcement, especially, why that arena is studied so much. So false memories are actually very easy to make. I would implore anybody interested to research false memories because there has been abundance of new research regarding all of this, and it is mostly because of law enforcement and trying to figure out how to make sure that law enforcement officers do everything they can to not taint memory and to get an accurate, statement on what happened that is tainted as little as possible. So that does taint. So, for instance, if people are tainted with the idea that aliens are bad, they're more likely to tell you that in hypnosis. So that happens. And here's one of the reasons why, we could support that with as well, is that these researchers are getting what they want to hear. I mean, why is David Jacobs, everybody going to him saying, no, the aliens were bad, the aliens were bad. But then you have other people like Barbara Lamb has a bunch of people who are saying, oh, the aliens are good, the aliens are good. Or Dr. Leo Sprinkle was an example of a psychologist. He's even a professor who would do this and everybody would say they were good. So there's definitely some, kind of confirmation bias, except for or some tainting of that information they're receiving happening, I think is apparent just given that information right there. Let's see. I have a degree and a number of certificates in psychology, worked with the autistic, let's see. Oh, So this guy has a lot of experience with psychology. That's great. I would love to hear his opinion. Maybe we'll have you on the show, Mark. So they did, someone, I didn't know this, and I apologize to that group, and I forget his name. I follow him, but the guy who made the Hellier documentary show, I haven't watched that yet, but he said they did a hypnotherapy session in Hellier and implanted a false abduction memory. John Keel did this too, way back in the day. So it's doable, unfortunately. Let's see, here's a person, Jay King. He says, John Mack called this the problem of intersubjectivity, that people almost always taint their conclusions because of the mere interaction between two people. And that's exactly right. In fact, they find in the false memory, if a witness is taken off to be by themselves immediately after something happens, if that witness talks to one person, they're going to be tainted by the opinion of that one person. And the studies have borne this out. So that's why, when somebody witnesses a crime, if the police are there or present or close, what they'll typically do is take that person to be all by themselves and not talk to anyone, because those first people you talk to, you're going to be heavily tainted by. And the worst thing you can do is have a group of witnesses get together and say, what did you see? What did you see? Because they're all going to then taint each other's memories. So you shouldn't do that. Alejandro, can a therapist do hypnosis in an unbiased way? Here's my answer, and they're asking me or Mark, which is great. And I'd love to hear Mark's opinion on this. I think that it is possible, but the only way to really do that, the therapist can't be known. If the person goes to a therapist to get hypnotherapy, they don't know what's going on with him, but they don't know that the hypnotherapist is an abduction researcher. They're just going to a hypnotherapist in general. That would be fine. The problem is, and this is what would be rough for like me, if someone came to me and they knew that I was interested in, wrote about UFOs and stuff, their experience is going to be tainted. So it is kind of difficult. But this is why, in my opinion, the whole psychological field has to take this topic more seriously if we're going to really find anything out. Because the psychologists out there or therapists out there who are getting information should be sharing that information, so we can find out, your typical therapists out there, if they're getting this sort of information, what sort of information are they getting, so we can share kind of more of this pure information to be able to figure something out. So Mark is using the terms transference and countertransference. It's really easy to project. So it's really easy for a hypnotherapist to not even intentionally project, their beliefs to another person. In fact, at least for me, when I do hypnotherapy, and this is what you're taught, you just ask questions. You lead in some ways, but not necessarily the way you would think, not in what they are going to share. But you do, it's kind of easy in a way, because you lead them into the relaxation. And then you ask, what are you seeing? What, and if they see a person, what is that person telling you? Very simple questions like that. And then you let them dialogue. You don't say, what did the UFO look like? Was it round? Was it circle? Those sort of things are the problems. Mark Salzman said he has no firsthand experience with hypnotherapy. But I'm sure, even without hypnotherapy, talk therapy, cognitive therapy, which is really important, is just talking things out with people, which still you can influence people. Let's see. Unless there's any other questions, I think we've been going on for quite a while right now. Thanks. Awesome stuff. Thank you, Joe Carey. So I'm really excited. So this is the first one. So next week, I'll try to let you know as soon as possible. So follow my social media, follow me on Patreon, or elsewhere, or even on YouTube. I'll post them early as possible. Like I did with this one, I only posted 2 hours early, but I'll post them earlier to let you know what topics we're going to cover. And in fact, since you all joined me in this first one, I'll let you have an opinion. I've listed out some of the talks that I do. The TTSA, astronomers and UFOs, religion and UFOs. Let's see, what are some of the others I could put together really quick? Steven Spielberg. Out of those 4, what would you be most interested to hear about? And that's what I'll do next week. I'll do my talk on one of those 4 topics. TTSA in the background, Steven Spielberg, astronomers and UFOs, religion and UFOs. Let me know in the chat what you think would be your favorite, and I will check that out. Otherwise, this is my new thing, is snapping. When I'm like this, feels fun to snap. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining me. What I've got coming up next week, let's see, Wednesday, I will do a show of those ones that you guys, whatever one you guys want to see. So that'll be a Rojas report. I'm also on Wednesday doing a Den of Geek live stream with Bryce Zabel. That's going to be a lot of fun. He's going to talk about UFO disclosure. He really feels there's a lot more secrets that are out there and that they're going to come out soon and stuff like that. And I want to ask him, what makes you think that? And what do you think that they're holding back? So that'll be an interesting conversation. But also, Bryce Zabel has made a lot of movies and TV shows, including the show Dark Skies, which is a lot about kind of the mythology behind UFO conspiracies. But he also made a show called Pandemic. And he used to be the head of the Academy of Arts and Sciences. So essentially, he was the president of the Academy Awards. So, and during 9/11, and he had to make the decision to postpone the event. I want to ask him about right now, because during our current pandemic, there are things that were in his TV show that have come true in this pandemic. And also, the Academy Awards is having to delay. I want to ask about that decision making. So that's going to be really interesting. And then we'll get into disclosure and his thoughts there. We earlier were talking about Richard Dolan, and Bryce Zabel actually wrote a book with Bryce Zabel speculating what disclosure would be like. So we'll talk to him about all of that too. Yeah, Bryce Zabel is awesome. And then next Friday, we'll have another one of these. And then I'll give you some more updates, because let me look at my calendar. On July 2nd, we'll have Kevin Knuth. We'll be doing an SCU. And then stay tuned too, because in the next day or two, I know Karen, and I'll probably be doing this with her, we're going to be releasing information about her International UFO Congress for 2020 and what the future holds for that. So stay tuned for that. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm so excited that we're going to be conversing and talking a lot more in the near future. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think that we're going to make some extraordinary discoveries together, and we're going to be living through an incredible time. Not that we haven't already in the last few years, but we're going to continue to do so. But now we're going to be able to do it in a more interactive way, and this is going to be a lot of fun. So thank you all for joining. Until next time. Somebody said it already in the chat. Adios, muchachos.